We are privileged to have MQ Qureshi, the head of Director of Consumer Strategy for Ford Motor Company. He is a visionary leader who has ignited growth and driven innovation across multiple industries. His background is dynamic. It's everywhere from McDonald's to Grainger. So thank you. He's going to be joined on the stage by our very own Patrick O'Keefe, our VP of Sales here at Helium. And we are going to be exploring the strategic importance of data in driving digital innovation and harnessing personalized customer experiences, optimizing marketing strategies, and last, enhancing operational efficiencies. So welcome to you both, and the stage is yours.
Perfect.
All righty.
Good morning, DV. Come on, DV, come on. Good morning, let's hear it. Let's make everybody jealous on this side of the wall that they didn't choose this session today. So I do want to straighten one thing up. I've been asked twice already. No, that is not my fraternity picture profile, so don't ask me again after this session. Hey, I hope everybody's enjoying the conference over the last couple of days. Some amazing content, amazing, incredible customer presentations. So much wealth of knowledge that I hope you're all leaving here with a fun event. Very, very excited to kick off this morning's session with a panel discussion with a good friend, MQ, coming from Ford Motor Company. We are going to be focused specifically on digital transformation initiatives that are highly customer data driven, and really hearing about some of the best practices, some of the insights, some of the lessons learned, and a lot of the new models that MQ has experienced over his lifetime career and currently in his current role at Ford Motor Company. So MQ, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
So to kick things off, aside just from your current role, you've worked for some incredible brand enterprises, including McDonald's, Grainger, Aspen Dental. Why don't you start off and kick things off with talking a little bit about your journey through digital?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Lovely to see everybody. I hope Patrick and I have a wonderful conversation today that's informative for all, and afterward, if you want to connect, would love to meet everyone. Yeah, so my journey in digital is one that's quite unlikely because I actually didn't want to be in this space at all. I originally wanted to be an architect. And a boy who grew up in Kenya, South Africa, Swaziland, etc., by all odds shouldn't be here right now, but I am. And when I came to the United States at 16, it was really to start, thinking about architecture. My dad, on the other hand, being the brown dad that he was, said that, okay, you can do architecture, but you also have to get a degree in computer science. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. So I hate to admit that he was right. But what happened was I got into that, and while I enjoyed architecture quite a bit, I realized this is late 90s, I needed to pay for school and figure out some of that, and I taught myself how to code HTML and design using Photoshop, and I went to local businesses and I started basically hustling and saying, hey, can I build you a website? And what I realized was that my need for creativity, my like of working with people, kind of melded naturally into that space. So made the shift over, did that, was building things, got into a small startup, and then my brother got a job actually with Ford. It was like 25 years ago. And moved to Detroit, and he said, why don't you come up here? And I did, and then I got recruited into GM at OnStar. I was there for about 5 years. My wife was from Toronto, was living and working in Detroit at the time. We got married, moved to Chicago, did some independent consulting with the likes of Kraft Foods and Philip Morris and Sears. Then went into the agency side of the world, was with an agency that got bought by Publicis, and merged with Razorfish. Got to work on some really cool things like we did Puma's global digital strategy, which was fantastic. Did the same for Express and others. Then got recruited into Grainger, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with, but it's the largest MRO supplier in the world. We were doing a massive digital transformation at that time. I came into a total e-commerce team of about 20, when I left 4.5 years later, having stood up the program and product teams and then run international e-com for a couple of years, we went from a team of 20 to about 300 overall. We went from about $1 billion in e-com revenue to over $4.5 billion. And then I went to McDonald's, delivered the McDonald's mobile app and kiosk tech that you still see out in the market today. That was quite an adventure. That was also the kick in the pants to do something on my own. So I actually had an idea rolling around in my head around a startup, which was based on my own interests of travel and exploration. So I pitched the idea to my boss at the time, the SVP of Global Digital Experience. He and I, along with a third colleague, left McDonald's, went out and founded Zuby's. We raised money, brought it to market, and were on a good trajectory until COVID hit, which is not friendly for travel startups. And then last couple of years, I was doing digital transformation for the Aspen Group. And Aspen Dental is one of them. Clear Choice Implants is one of those. That's the one I work with most directly. And then since February of this year, I've been with Ford Motor Company and specifically working on Blue Cruise, which is Ford's hands-free assisted driving technology. So if you haven't tried it, I would highly recommend you do because it's awesome.
It's amazing. It's just an amazing journey and so many different variety of digital projects underneath the brands, different markets themselves. So thinking on that, if you could, maybe choose one really unique, creative innovation project, digital transformation that was customer driven throughout any of those experiences, and a little bit about that particular journey coming into the transformation itself, and then post what you were looking to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll actually give you two, and I'll start with the one that was very early on in my career, and that actually informed a lot of what I've kind of done since. So the first one was at GM, at OnStar, and what I was going in, and I was like the assistant web guy. That was, I think, was the official title. Back in those days, this is like 2000. The landscape wasn't as complex as it is right now, or sophisticated. And I just heard around the office that we have terrible customer data. And we were spending millions with companies like Axiom to come in and clean up those customer data records. And, because it was really impacting renewal, it was really impacting any kind of comms, et cetera. And we just never seemed to be able to crack that nut. So I got very curious, and said, why do we have bad data to begin with? And so without knowing what I was doing, I started investigating the journey. And what I realized is that when customers were buying a vehicle and they were getting OnStar, the salesperson was walking to the vehicle, hitting the button and reading out all that customer data, and somebody was typing it in. And so, if your name is, fairly simple and you live on a fairly simple address, great. But if you're Mohammed Qureshi, or you live on Shabelsky Lane, 16-digit VIN, you get where I'm going, right, in terms of bad data. So I came up with a very simple system and said, hey, how about if we leverage some of the staff in the dealership, and instead of the salesperson having to do this, let's give it to a data entry clerk and have them, and I'll give them a little website. They can copy and paste that info in. Somebody can pick it up, copy and paste it out. And so the idea was do a small POC, around that and show that that can work. So you'd think that, after having done that they'd go, hey, this is fantastic. This can save us a lot of money, a lot more accuracy with the data, et cetera. And they said, no, kid, get in the back of the line. There's a 2-year wait list to get integrated and automate any of this. So me not being, taking no for an answer, said, okay, well, I went to people in the field sales side. I went to folks in the call center side who all really believed in it. I got an executive to buy in on it who gave me a little bit of money. And we said, we'll take this manual process and we'll just automate it all the way through. And spread it out, amongst the whole country in this manual process that I described. Well, you think after that they'd say, hey, great, it works at a national level. Let's do this. Nope, 2-year wait. So then I said, okay, let me go to all of our OEMs. I went to VW and Acura and others. And by the way, no one gave me permission to do any of this. This is just me going and talking to people and saying, let's just get it done. And I was lucky enough that they believed in the idea. All the OEMs started then taking it on. And up until I left, they still hadn't automated it. So what that tells you is that, one, if you're interested in transformation, it can begin at the lowest level. I was a 20-something-year-old kid, and I wasn't like a career GM or automotive expert. I just looked at a problem, looked at the journey, and said, where can I remove friction? And approached it that way, and basically was relentless in terms of trying to make it happen. So change can come from anywhere, but you have to be dogged about it. And what that has done is informed how I've approached everything, which is really starting with the journeys of everything. And so that led into, when I looked at building up what we were trying to do at McDonald's, there were so many multiple ideas of what we could do as far as innovation is concerned. One idea that I think was thrown about at the time that actually came from the CDO was, let's have a virtual jukebox in every restaurant. And that jukebox was, you can connect it to the Wi-Fi, you can now play your own music. Fantastic. Does that sell more burgers? No, it doesn't. And ultimately, the way that it works is that a McDonald's franchisee doesn't care about everything else. They're caring about how much volume they're moving through. And how many of us are really going to spend hours in a McDonald's where we're going to pick out what our music's going to be? So what we have to do is look at those journeys and think about what's fit for purpose and really focus on what is going to meet the core need. The amount of effort and, to deliver something cool while, being cool doesn't necessarily meet that core business practice.
I want to underline that fit for purpose mentality because I think it's a powerful methodology that everybody can take away from. It's something, relative to whether it's a large digital transformation, dealing with customer data, all the way down to a singular new journey execution. How do you go about in any of these large enterprises that you've worked, prioritizing what customer experiences, what customer journeys are most meaningful for the business outcomes that you want to go after?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. So prioritization is key, right? You only have so much time. You only have so many resources. What are you going to do first? So the question is that what is the most core part of your business, right? And what are you doing as far as prioritization of whether it just be innovation or whether it be anything that's on your feature list or product list, et cetera, that's going to fulfill that core tenet of your business. And then the second part of that is that how much of your leadership believes that that's the core part. And what's really interesting is that there's a lot of differing opinions. Now, I think that a lot of that is not because people are inherently biased towards, hey, that's not your idea. That's your idea, not my idea, so therefore I'm not going to like it, right? I think everybody's just trying to mostly do the right thing. But the organizational models that we have largely in place today are based on a kind of an industrial era, right? It's very linear in nature. Every team has a particular focus, and the theory is that if all of those things work well, that it'll result in a good experience or more sales for the company. So you have to then go back to that idea of the journey. And so depending on where you are in the business, you might be focused on the sales funnel, you might be focused on the journey, you might be focused on the experience. You have to unify all of that together. And I can't tell you how many times I've gathered top executives at a company and said, let's go through this journey together. And it's amazing how many times that has really changed the focus, because what we went in with thinking that this is what we need to accomplish changed quite a bit when people got a chance to see that interaction across silos, that interaction across the journey points, and they were able to go, oh, okay, I need to remove that piece of friction. So coming back to your question of prioritization, it's one, establishing that as an enterprise view, of getting everybody aligned to what the journey is, what the goals are, and taking your mindset out of my selfish goal of driving more sales and saying, what is the customer trying to accomplish across all of this? And if you focus on that, that'll the byproduct of that will be better sales.
And the unification, journeys, sales funnel, channels, how important is that customer view? I think you're alluding to that now, but just double clicking on that.
Yeah. I mean, it is the most important thing, but you have to make sure that you're also interpreting that customer data and that customer view in a way that's useful. So I saw something on LinkedIn the other day. It was pretty awesome. So if I describe two people to you in terms of personas, right? We try to provide some personality to our customers by creating these personas. So if you looked at someone who was born in 1948, married twice, lives in a castle, rich and famous, and is from England, right? That's a pretty specific persona, right? But that's King Charles, and I could also describe Ozzy Osbourne. Those are two completely different people, right? So we have to get, so when we're creating some of these things, we have to get specific. And so when you're looking at that customer data, one, you have to get specific, and you have to think about, okay, whether it's King Charles or Ozzy Osbourne, what are they trying to accomplish when they're interacting with me? And am I setting up my channels and my journeys to collect data in a way that's useful? So one of the things that we always think is that, let's collect as much data as possible. Let's get all of this information. Well, how much of it is useful? How much of it is useful to what that customer is trying to accomplish? It might be really good data that I want to know as a marketer, but is that going to help that customer go from one step to the next? So when you're gathering that data, you might actually want to think about slimming down and focusing, getting specific and saying, from one step to the next, what am I trying to accomplish? What is that customer trying to accomplish? And when I'm looking at that data, am I collecting it in the right way? And am I creating the insight from it? Because ultimately that data is great, but our growth is not going to come from data, it's going to come from intelligence. And so that really helps in terms of when you take that and you put it against a journey, you can now have two really good tools, simple in outlook, but that really helps your overall prioritization.
So going on that collection of data or customer intelligence, I love that framework. And this is something I think every enterprise out in the audience could agree with. You're always going down to the mandates instilled by your enterprise around data privacy, data security. How do you best go about migrating through, maintaining those standards, but also accelerating the intelligence that you want to bring in around customer data?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, data privacy, it was talked about on the stage yesterday as a fundamental human right. That's something that Ford takes very seriously. And our chief privacy officer has said, that data privacy is a fundamental human right, which we can all agree on. However, sometimes when we're marketers, we're trying to think about, great, well, if I can just get it this way, I can be so much better. Like, being in healthcare before, even something as simple as retargeting is a challenge because of PII and PHI, right? So while data privacy and data security is super important, we can't look at it as such huge stopping blocks that it keeps us dead in the water. What we have to think about is how do we ask in the right way? And then, and is that ask going to translate to doing something or creating something of value for the customer? So if you're asking somebody for consent to get their data, is your consent simply because you want that data so that you can do something that's going to try and sell them more? Or is that consent based on something that's going to provide more value to the customer? If you can make that clear in your journey and your experience interactions with customers across multiple channels, however you ask for that consent and that for that data, you can most of the time, if that's their focus, then getting that yes is easy. But if you're burying consent in like 20 different consents, if you're trying to be sneaky about it, if it's something that you're asking for that you're intending to not, that doesn't meet your fit for purpose need, and you're selling it to somebody else, that's that's something that I would just advise that it's not good business practice, and it's not something that actually helps generate trust. The other thing is that the question you have to ask yourself is, how much of this data do I need in perpetuity, right? So practicing, a good, clean collection, making sure that customers are prioritized in terms of that collection, and then when you collect that data, not holding on to it, forever, taking a real, assessment. I think, doing privacy assessments and saying, how much of this do we need to keep? Let's purge this if we need to, so that we can keep moving forward.
I want to go back to something in kind of switching a little bit of gears in kind of the pre-preparation before going into a digital transformative project, especially that's heavily utilizing customer data. Your methodology around gaining buy-in from the executive stakeholders within your enterprise. You mentioned a few minutes ago, executives saying, well, this is not my idea, this is your idea.
Right.
So how do you best, and over time, evolving across a lot of these big brands that you've worked with, how have you refined that skill set, selling the buy-in and getting their agreement around the investments to be made?
Well, it wasn't easy, and it's still not. A quick show of hands, how many folks are in either pursuing a transformation or in the middle of a transformation right now in their organizations? All right, now do you see an end goal to that? Or is it gonna constantly be happening? Right? Now, that's the thing that I find is a very interesting binary, assumption in terms of leadership. A lot of, they might be going into it and saying, yeah, we're gonna do this transformation and then we're gonna be here, right? And then we're gonna let that lie, for however long, because now we've made the investment, right? The truth is that the reality is that this is not a one-time deal. You're setting up a baseline for the future, but you're always constantly growing, and you're building on top of what you have. So one thing is that you have to think about how do you make sure that that message is understood and that there's an appetite for it, because what tends to happen is if you are not clear about that, what happens is that when you make that initial investment and then you keep going back for more rounds and they're just getting frustrated with you saying, hey, when the hell is this going to end? Right? So you have to make sure that you're on top of that from the beginning. A second thing is that when you're going in, ultimately this comes down to a series of proposals, a series of asks that you're going to be going in with. Now, if you're going into an executive team and you're going into that room and they're hearing what you have to say for the first time, you failed. That's your mistake. You need to make sure that well before that, you are doing the work to ensure that everybody in there, or at least a majority who's in there, know what you're going to say, are aligned to what you're going to say. You've had, you've had the coffees, you've had the lunches, you've spent that time ensuring that not only have you communicated what you're trying to do, but you've taken their input and you're giving them an opportunity to put their fingerprints on what you're about to present. Because what that does is that helps with success in the room, right? And that's important, because if you go in there and you're presenting, an executive team is not going to be sitting there and going, oh my God, you're brilliant, this is incredible, we've never seen this before. Only happens in the movies, right? What happens is that executives are skeptical, as they should be. That's their role. Their role is to be skeptical of what's being put in front of them and to ask what can be done better here, right? So you have to do that legwork to make sure that you are setting that up and that you're getting that buy-in ahead of time. A third part is that, when you're looking at it, ultimately we are all part of a business. A business is not, while it might be completely complex and very dynamic and there's many different aspects to it, at the end of the day, it's actually very binary. It's a 1 and a 0. You're either generating revenue and sales or you are a cost center. So when you are looking at and framing your transformation, you have to think about, when I'm going and talking to the executive team about it, am I growing sales by doing this? Am I removing risk by doing this? Am I reducing cost by doing this? So if you keep those three things in focus, your message is going to be a lot more palatable, because those executives are making decisions on how do we operate this business. So your mindset, while it might be focused in product on a day-to-day basis, or it might be focused in marketing on a day-to-day basis, you have to absorb that and put it in those terms. Now, let's say you've done all of that and you have now come into a place where you can now start embarking on that journey. You also have to make sure that you're giving them a line of sight into what you can accomplish. So present the 3-year plan, right? Talk about why it's important, why it's relevant, but start off with a very achievable goal, right? And say that these things are going to be, the first 90 days, whatever that timeline is, we're going to achieve this, and this is going to be a marker to tell us if we can go to the next level. So what you're doing is that you're also, in embarking on this journey, you are also helping them see that, hey, we're not just going to invest millions of dollars and go off on this multi-year thing and then we'll see it later. You're showing results along the way, and you have to build that into your plan. And so if you go in with those, doing the legwork, making sure it's focused on the operating principles of the business, and you're showing goals that you can achieve in short timelines, that is key to getting that overall buy-in to execute on your transformation.
So no digital transformation initiative, especially with customer data, is not with hearing from challenges and obstacles, or just general pivots along the road. How have you gone about when you've hit a roadblock, or you've hit an obstacle, or the priorities have changed in flight of the initiative? How have you combated that to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be willing to roll with the punches. This always happens. The business outlook changes, things happen, and so one, if you're in a position to be leading, some of these things, you have to keep your ear to the ground and be sensitive to what the business is going through. Because if the business is suddenly facing some, existential threats, and conversion numbers are going down, pipelines are going down, et cetera, and you're coming in and you're saying, hey, I want to go spend another, $4 million on going and doing this, or whatever that amount is, it's going to go against what everybody's looking at on a day-to-day basis. So you have to contextualize that and say, okay, when I'm framing that message out, how am I doing it to show that actually, yeah, we're dealing with this piece right here, but we are investing so that we don't get into this situation again, potentially. So you have to be willing to be fluid and pivot and look at what the business challenge is and say, and find that linkage between your transformation or your initiative and those challenges. And sometimes it might take, changing your mind completely about what you're doing because you have new data that's coming in. Case in point, when I founded the startup Zubies, we were a small startup, and we had a limited amount of funds, and we were running out of funds because we were, we just couldn't keep up with Google AdWords buys that much larger travel organizations were spending. So that really had to push me back to the drawing board and say, how am I going to combat this threat? I'm not raising enough money in order to keep up with the demand that I need to generate traction. So that forced me to go back to the table and say, maybe what I need to do is I actually need to pivot to a more B2B model. So instead of being a B2C company that did bespoke travel experiences, we thought, okay, how do we deal with that challenge? So I came up with, let's look at hotels, let's look at brands, and we go to those hotels and we say, we can provide white label experiences for your customers and give you a cut of it so that you can have share of wallet of those customers when they leave your establishment, not just when they're staying there. And then on the brand side, we're doing these experiences. How about we feature your brand as part of it, and that creates volume and appeal. So it drove my customer acquisition cost way down because now I had to focus on acquiring more B2B customers on both sides. I didn't have to compete on the Google AdWords side. So the hotels would create the volume, the brands would create the appeal, and that would give me an optimal way out. Now, that presented other challenges, but we only have a minute and a half left. So.
No, that's incredible. And it's a great example from your past, I think, in that ability to stay fluid and flexible and not be afraid to pivot as long as you're going back to the methodology coming into the initiative itself.
Yeah, there's something that I keep saying. I've said it over and over, and I keep saying it in my current role. It's the biggest takeaway that I took up from my startup adventure. I'd been a professional in digital for almost 17 years at that point, but I learned completely new things, and this lesson is the biggest lesson. It is we should love our product, but we shouldn't be in love with our product. We should be in love with how to sell our product. And that is the biggest difference. You can create a beautiful solution, but if nobody sees it, if there's no traction to it, what's it worth? So again, fit for purpose, journey, what are we solving for? How do you bring that back, and how do you focus on generating traction and revenue? And everything else will align to it if you keep that focus.
Love it. Love it. MQ, thank you so much for spending the time today
Thank
and
you.
sharing all the insights. Hopefully it was very valuable. If we can hear for MQ.